Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I welcome you to the series History, Science, and Faith in Islam. It is a narrative designed to foster a renewal of faith based on a knowledge of our history, science, and culture. This is the second of two sessions on Islam in Persia, today known as Iran. Genghis Khan destroyed the urban centers of learning in Central Asia and Iran. In some cities, more than 90% of the population was slaughtered. Throbbing urban centers became grazing land for Mongol horses. Mosques and madrasas alike were razed. The Arabic-speaking learned elite perished or fled, some towards India, others towards Egypt and Anatolia. With its Arabic-centered urban civilization in ruins, the leadership of the remnants of the community fell to the rural areas where Farsi was the spoken language. As it was from the huts and hermitages of the Persian landscape that Islam emerged once again to conquer the conquerors and carry forth its message to the far corners of Asia, Europe, and Africa. Historical currents had prepared the world of Islam for just such a calamity. For more than 100 years before the Mongols descended from the Gobi Desert, the heart of Islam was beating to a different rhythm from that of the Khazis and ulama, with their zealous emphasis on the finer points of fiqh. Imam al-Ghazali passed away in the year 1111, perhaps the single most important integrator of Islamic knowledge in the first millennium of Islam, had brought the tasawwuf into the mainstream of Islamic sciences. Indeed, through his own example, he made the tasawwuf the focus of Islamic life. Following his work, intellectual activity in the spiritual dimension of Islam accelerated. The towering personality of the age who represented this dimension was Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, who passed away in the year 1186. Sheikh Abu Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahmatullah alayhi, was born in Gilan in northern Persia in 1077. It was a period of intense intellectual activity, and the Sheikh received his early training from local ulama. In 1095, as a young man of 19, he set out to Baghdad seeking additional knowledge and training. He sought and received instruction from the luminaries of his age, including Sheikh Abu Wafa ibn Aqil, Sheikh Muhammad al-Bakhlani, and Sheikh Abu Zakaria Tabrizi. At the age of 50, he received his ijaza, which means a diploma, from Sheikh Khazi Abi Sa'id al-Mukhrami, and was commissioned to head the madrasa of Sheikh Khazi Abi Sa'id in Baghdad. Sheikh Abdul Qadir's fame soon spread throughout the land. The courtyard of the madrasa was too small to hold the crowds, so the lecturers were moved to the Jami' Masjid. The Jami' Masjid too proved to be too small, so the lecturers were moved to a vast open field on the outskirts of the city. It is said that as many as 70,000 people listened to the Sheikh at one time. Scribes recorded his sermons and passed them on for posterity. The lectures of the Sheikh covered every facet of Islamic life, including kalam, hadith, fiqh, tafhim of the Quran, which is commentaries of the Quran, ethics, Siratul Nabi, which is life and example of the Prophet ﷺ, ethics, and tasawwuf. He was strict in his observance of the Sharia and chided those who were remiss in their observance of the injunctions of the Quran. In the intense spiritual atmosphere of the age, many self-proclaimed ulama claimed that their special insights into religion made them an excuse not to observe the obligatory prayers and fasting and zakat. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani chided them and declared that any position not based on the Sharia was atheism. The Sheikh's exposition of Tasawwuf, recorded in Al-Futuhat al-Rabbani, is a veritable fountain of spirituality and has inspired Muslims and many non-Muslims for over 800 years. The Sheikh's humble disposition endeared him to the poor, and his forthrightness and rectitude brought him the respect of the high and the mighty. Sultans and emperors alike waited to see him and partake of his wisdom. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani inspired a galaxy of Sufi sages in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. After he passed away in 1186, his disciples carried his message to the far corners of the Islamic world. The Qadariya Sufi Tariqa was established to give concrete expression to his spiritual, social ideals. It was the first of the many tariqas that were to dominate the Islamic landscape after the 13th century. The Qadariya Tariqa radiated its influence to every corner of the old world and was instrumental in bringing millions into the fold of Islam. As late as the 19th century, Uthman Dan Fodio, inspired by visions of the great Sheikh, waged his struggle to establish a just social political order in West Africa. In India and Pakistan, he is referred to as Ghawsul Adam Dastagir and is recorded a position of honor next to only that of the Prophet ﷺ and the early companions. The work of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani and those who immediately followed him was the life raft that rescued Islam after the Mongol devastations. For an entire generation between 1219 and 1250, the horsemen from Mongolia roamed the Eurasian continent, destroying ancient cities, reshaping, reforming, and remolding entire races and societies. The concurrent challenge from the Crusaders from the West was no less menacing. Indeed, the Crusaders made a determined attempt to convert the Mongols to Christianity, or at least to forge an alliance with them with the avowed intent of extirpating Islam, eliminating Islam. Following the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1261, the military threat subsided, but the threat of losing Asia to non-Islamic ideologies remained. And it was Tasawwuf that rose to take up the challenge and rescue Islam in its gravest hour. The genius of Tasawwuf lay in its ecstatic and inclusive character. It was the Islam of the heart, not of the mind. The disappearance of a city culture that has supported the Islamic edifice of fiqh and fatwa had thrown the mantle of leadership to the countryside, where Islam was based on emotion and devotion. The Khanqahs established by the Qadariya and other Sufi orders became the focus of Islamic life. A Khanqah had 5 distinct functions. First, it was a mosque wherein the faithful offered their obligatory prayers. Second, it was a madrasa where instruction was provided in the Quran and the sciences of the fiqh. Third, it was a retreat where individuals could seek solitude and focus on the inner selves or congregate for dhikr, which is the recital of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fourth, it was a place to mold the very character of people under the watchful guidance of a sheikh and teach them the virtues of selfless service, chivalry, courage, devotion to the divine, and a universal outlook on life. And lastly, it was a place of rest for the weary traveler or a refuge for the family fleeing from the persecutions of the times. Persian ecstatic Islam more than met its challenges. By 1295, the Ilkhanid, the Mongol Ghazan, accepted Islam and Persia was back in the forefront of Islamic life. From the Persian heartland, Islam spread to the subcontinent of India, Pakistan, and projected itself into the archipelago of Malaysia and Indonesia. To the west, it reinforced its presence in sub-Saharan Africa and grew to be the dominant faith on that continent. The Ottomans, who emerged after the Mongol-Tatar deluge, were themselves heavily influenced by Tasawwuf, and it was out of the cauldron of Sufi ideas that the Safavid dynasty emerged. With the destruction of the urban centers of learning, wherein Arabic was the medium of instruction, Farsi emerged as the medium of expression for ecstatic Islam. 500 years of association with Islam had transformed Farsi and had exposed it to the rich lexicon of Arabic. And now it was the turn of Farsi to take center stage. It was through Farsi that sublime poetry and exquisite prose found their expression in the post-Mongol, Timurid, Safavid, Mughal, and Ottoman periods. Perhaps the greatest of the Farsi poets, and one whose impact is still felt in the modern world, was Maulana Rumi, who passed away in the year 1273. No other scholar personifies the transition from the pre-Mongol urban empirical Islamic civilization to the post-Mongol rural ecstatic civilization as does Rumi. His Islamic name was Muhammad, Khudawandagar, and Jalaluddin were his titles. He is called Rumi due to his residence in Konya, which was located in a province referred to at the time as Rum, meaning an old province of the Roman Empire. His disciples called him Maulana, meaning our guide and teacher. He was born to Persian Afghan parents in 1207 in the city of Balkh in Afghanistan. His father, Bahauddin Walad, was a scholar of repute, a Sufi master of the Kubrawiya Tariqa, and was held in high esteem by the local people. The sensitive mind of Rumi absorbed the scholarship and spirituality of his parents, but the quiet life of Balkh was soon shattered by the firestorm from Mongolia. As Genghis Khan descended on Khorasan and advanced towards Persia and Afghanistan, Bahauddin Walad fled to Nishapur, where the young Rumi met the celebrated poet Fariduddin Attar, author of the classic Mantakh Tair, which means Conference of the Birds. Attar saw in the young lad the potential of a genius and gave him a copy of his works as a gift. The Mongol avalanche soon engulfed all of Persia, and Bahauddin fled once again with his family, this time to Baghdad. News of the arrival of Sheikh Bahauddin reached Kaikubad, the Seljuk ruler of Konya. Kaikubad was a patron of scholars. He invited Bahauddin to settle in Konya, whereupon the Rumi family set out for Anatolia, visiting the cities of Makkah and Medina on the way and performing the Hajj. Sheikh Bahauddin died in 1231, leaving the young Jalaluddin in charge of the madrasa he had founded. In 1232, Rumi met Sheikh Burhanuddin Tirmidhi, himself a student of Sheikh Bahauddin, and became his murid. Under Sheikh Burhanuddin's direction, Rumi mastered the sciences of Kalam, Hadith, Fiqh, the Quranic sciences, Arabic, and Farsi grammar, as well as Tasawwuf. But the luminary who inspired Maulana Rumi to his ecstatic poetry was Sheikh Shamsuddin Tabrizi. Maulana Rumi met Sheikh Tabrizi in 1245, and the two forged a spiritual friendship that inspired the Maulana to compose poetry. When Sheikh Tabrizi disappeared from Konya in 1247, the Maulana was distraught and sent messengers to look for the Sheikh all over Anatolia and Syria. The search proved futile, but the Sheikh had impelled the spiritual ocean of the Maulana just as the setting moon impels the waves of the ocean. The Maulana poured forth his ecstasy in his first collection, Diwan-e Shams-e Tabrizi, a work of unmatched rhythm, music, alchemy, and spirituality. The work that bestowed a universal stature on Maulana Rumi was the Masnavi, a collection of over 27,000 verses. The Masnavi is a veritable rhapsody of love of the human soul for the divine. The Maulana drew upon the scriptures as well as the classics of Farsi and Arabic to construct a symphony of the soul in his journey towards the Master. Each verse is of incomparable beauty, each story of unsurpassed wisdom. It is said in Sufi circles that God took a drop of love from his infinite ocean of love, without in any way increasing or decreasing the depth of the ocean, and bestowed it upon humankind, dividing it equally between every man and woman ever created. If one were to claim that the Maulana captured the very essence of the drop of divine love that has sustained humankind, it would not be an exaggeration. The Masnavi is the epitome of Islamic Tasawwuf. It has had a profound impact on Islamic culture and poetry, especially in the arc extending from Europe through Turkey, Persia, Central Asia, and the subcontinent. It has been translated into most modern languages. The Maulana stood at the pinnacle of spirituality, as expressed in the Farsi language. His work continued to inspire Muslim writers and poets through the centuries. Some, like Hafiz, who passed away in the year 1391, approached the spiritual heights of the Maulana. Other great ones, like Jami, who passed away in 1492, and Muhammad Iqbal, who passed away in 1938, paid him homage. It is a tribute to the sage that the most popular poet in America today is not Shakespeare or Milton, but Jalaluddin Rumi. The legacy of Persia was the spiritual archetype that dominated Islam for 500 years. It was the renowned Sufi masters, men like Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti, Maulana Rumi, Sheikh Bahauddin Naqshband, and Sheikh Sohrawardi, who served as role models for Muslims. Paupers and emperors alike sought to emulate their example. Architects and artisans derived their inspiration from them. Reformers and counter-reformers alike used their names to draw attention to their movements. Timur, conqueror of Asia, was an ardent supporter of Sufi masters. A Sufi sheikh trained the Ottoman Sultan Muhammad, who was the conqueror of Istanbul. The Safavid dynasty of Persia grew out of a Sufi movement. Mughal emperors Akbar and Jahangir were so devoted to Sheikh Salim Chishti that they performed pilgrimages to his Khanqa on foot. Uthman Dan Foodier initiated his reforms in West Africa in the name of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani. And Sheikh Shamil of the Caucasus, who resisted the Russians for 30 years, was inspired by the Naqshbandi Tariqa. The Persian spiritual influence extended to the architecture of post-Mongol Islam. Islamic architecture is a projection of the heavens and earth and seeks to realize in the matrix of material form a hint of the transcendence of heaven. Hence, geometry is divided into two parts: functional geometry and supernal geometry. Functional geometry is the exoteric aspect of mathematical forms. Supernal geometry describes the meaning behind those forms. Thus, a dot is not just the limit of space as defined in mathematics, but also the onset of the creation of space. A dot moves and creates a line, which is not just a linear connection of points, but the beginning of creation of space and a reminder in the Arabic and Farsi languages of the name of Allah. A line rotates and creates a circle, which becomes a representation of justice, just in as much as it shows no directional bias, and so on. The inherent focus on transcendence enabled Muslim architects to realize the construction of mosques and minarets alike, something of the transcendence that lies hidden in geometrical forms. The genius of Persian architecture was that it applied that transcendence to non-religious domain as well. Specifically, the application of supernal geometry with its emphasis on symbols and meaning to the construction of tombs and cenotaphs resulted in the construction of monuments of unparalleled beauty. The Timurids, the Safavids, and the Ottomans all constructed tombs or the graves of sages and royalty to capture something of the essence of heaven and earth. This art form reached its pinnacle in the Mughal court of Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal in memory of his wife Mumtaz Mahal. The erection of this monument, with its unsurpassed beauty and harmony, could have been possible only in the framework of an ecstatic Islam in which love, not ritual, was the first step in the ascent of man to heaven. Conversely, such a structure would not have been possible in the classical age of Islam, with its heavy emphasis on doctrine, the rational and the ritual. Classical Islam erected the edifice of law. In the Mongol period and the post-Mongol period, the edifice of law was used by the Persian-speaking people as a platform on which they erected monuments of love. From a historian's perspective, the most important contribution of the Farsi-speaking world was the institution of Zawiya. In Turkish, it is called tekke. The Persians did not invent this institution any more than they invented the sciences of tasawwuf. But it was in Persia and in the contiguous regions of Anatolia and the subcontinent that it emerged as the central institution of community life. The Zawiya was based on the mosque madrasa paradigm that had existed from the earliest days of Islam. The Persians and the Turks and the Indo-Pakistanis extended its function to include the cultivation of religious ecstasy through dhikr and the remembrance of God. The Zawiya also became a nucleus for youth movements wherein young men learned the virtues of chivalry and courage and nurtured their characters under the watchful eye of a Sufi sheikh. Ibn Battuta, in his Rehla, describes in detail the Zawiyas he visited in Anatolia, Persia, and India. Each Sufi order had its own Zawiyas in which young men and women gathered to pray, to learn the Quran and fiqh, to perform zikr, and to cultivate a comradeship based on faith. As commercial activity resumed after the Mongol destructions, these Zawiyas also became centers of guilds and trade associations. A calligrapher, for instance, would undergo years of training in the control of hand muscles, preparation and maintenance of his tools, concentration on his work, and focus on his soul. He would also be a member of one tariqa or the other, from which he would learn the discipline of the heart, which alone is the springboard of creative work. The Sufis made divine love accessible to the most illiterate peasant as well as the most sophisticated scholar. It was this immediacy of divine presence that molded the character of Muslims for 500 years after Genghis Khan, and the Zawiya was the institution that made it possible. The Zawiyas spread to all parts of the Islamic world and were instrumental in ensuring the stability of Muslim societies up until the 18th century. In the largely rural milieu of India, Pakistan, Persia, Turkey, and North Africa, the historical role of the Zawiya was pivotal. It was the men of the Zawiya who were the backbone of the Turkish marches and the rapid expansion of the Ottoman Empire. It was the men of the Zawiya who took Islam from Delhi and Lahore to the far corners of the subcontinent. It was the men of the Zawiya who triumphed over the Portuguese at the Battle of Al-Khasr al-Kabir in 1578 and rescued North Africa from the same fate that had befallen Muslim Spain. In the 18th century, the Zawiya came up against the cold efficiency of the joint stock companies from Europe. The encounter took place just as political and social decay was overtaking the Islamic world. In the encounter, the joint stock companies triumphed. But the spiritual legacy of the Zawiya endures to this day as a haunting reminder of a traditional Islam that once dominated the interconnecting landmass of Asia, Europe, and Africa. This brings to a close our session on Islam in Persia. In the next session, inshallah, we'll cover Islam in Africa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.